the name of a departed colleague. Respect his family. Respect his memory. Let's get this vote over with. Let's go to the business at hand and create the jobs that the American people are crying for. And I'm very pleased to see a colleague has arrived, so I would yield the floor.
Thank you. The senator from Wisconsin is recognized.
Madam President, I come here today to speak of my amendment number 1591, which is a bipartisan amendment to repeal the freight railroad industry's undeserved exemptions to the antitrust laws, exemptions that result in higher prices to hundreds of businesses and millions of consumers every day. These outmoded exemptions do damage to numerous industries across our country, industries that are vital to our economy and to the job market. From power companies that rely on coal shipped by rail, to farmers shipping grain, to chemical companies that rely on rail to transport raw materials, to paper companies that ship their finished products via rail, the railroad's antitrust exemption leads to higher prices and renders rail shippers at the mercy of rail monopolies engaged in anti-competitive practices. The railroads enjoy these antitrust immunities despite the industry's very high levels of concentration, with 4 freight railroads controlling nearly 90% of the market as measured by revenue and dividing up the country so that they face very little, if any, rail competition in many areas of our country. This amendment is very simple. Wherever the law provides freight railroads with an antitrust exemption, this amendment repeals it. In this way, the railroads will have to abide by the same rules of free competition as virtually every other industry. This amendment is identical to the Railroad Antitrust Enforcement Act, bipartisan legislation that has passed the Judiciary Committee by overwhelming margins in this Congress as well as in the past 2. Virtually no industry other than baseball insurance enjoys the sweeping nature of the antitrust exemptions, as does the freight railroad industry. And yet, paradoxically, the consolidated nature of the freight railroad industry makes full application of antitrust law even more necessary here. Just 3 decades ago, there were more than 40 Class I freight railroads in the United States. But today, after massive waves of consolidation, nearly 90% of industry revenues are controlled by just 4 railroads. Many areas of the country are served by only 1, leaving their shippers captive to rate increases and anti-competitive measures. The effects of these antitrust exemptions protecting monopoly behavior are easy to see. Increased concentration, combined with a lack of antitrust scrutiny, have had clear price effects. A September 2010 staff report of the Senate Commerce Committee stated that, quote, the 4 Class I railroads that today dominate the U.S. rail shipping market are achieving returns on revenue and operating ratios that rank them among the most profitable businesses in the United States economy. Since 2004, this report found, and I quote, Class I railroads have been raising prices by an average of 5% a year above inflation. The 4 largest railroads nearly doubled their collective profit margins in the last decade to 13%, ranking the railroad industry the 5th most profitable industry as ranked by Fortune magazine. A 2006 GAO report, furthermore, found that shippers in many geographical areas, quote, may be paying excessive rates due to a lack of competition in these markets. Given the industry's concentration and pricing power, the case for full-fledged application of the antitrust laws are plain. And it is more than just railroad shippers who pay the price of a railroad industry unchecked by antitrust oversight. These unjustified cost increases cause consumers to suffer higher electricity bills because the utility must pay for the high cost of transporting coal, higher prices for goods produced by manufacturers who rely on railroads to transport raw materials, as well as higher food prices for everyone. Railroad monopoly conduct ripples through the economy, causing pain in countless corners of commerce. The current antitrust exemptions protect a wide range of railroad industry conduct from antitrust scrutiny. Unlike virtually every other regulated industry, Justice Department cannot bring suit to block anti-competitive mergers, a fact that has greatly aided the sharp industry consolidation I have already described. Private parties and state attorneys general cannot bring private antitrust laws to obtain injunctive relief, leaving pernicious industry practices such as bottlenecks and paper barriers exempt from antitrust review. Railroad practices subject to the jurisdiction of the Surface Transportation Board are effectively immunized from antitrust remedies. Our amendment will eliminate these exemptions once and for all. Railroads will be fully subject to antitrust law and will have to play by the same rules of free competition that all other businesses do. The rail industry's widespread grant of antitrust exemption has its origin decades ago, when the industry was subject to extensive regulation by the long-ago abolished Interstate Commerce Commission. But no good reason exists today for these exemptions to continue. While railroad legislation in recent decades, including most notably the Staggered Rail Act of 1980, deregulated much railroad rate setting from the oversight of the Surface Transportation Board, these obsolete antitrust exemptions remained in place, insulating a consolidating industry from obeying the rules of fair competition. There is no reason to treat railroads any differently from dozens of other regulated industries in our economy that are fully subject to antitrust. When this amendment was filed a couple of weeks ago, the railroad industry responded by claiming that this amendment, quote, goes way beyond antitrust laws and looks to create new regulatory law on matters unrelated to antitrust, and in so doing treats railroads differently than other regulated industries, unquote. These arguments are completely without merit. Nothing in this amendment goes, quote, way beyond antitrust law or looks to create new regulatory law. In fact, this amendment creates absolutely no new regulatory law whatsoever. It simply repeals all of the antitrust exemptions enjoyed by the freight railroad industry. And this amendment would not treat railroads any differently than other regulated industries. The mere fact that an industry is regulated does not exempt it from antitrust law. Many other regulated industries, including the telecommunications sector regulated by the FCC, the aviation and trucking industries regulated by the Department of Transportation, are fully subject to antitrust law. This bill simply seeks to end the special exemption from antitrust law enjoyed by freight railroads, an exemption which is both wholly unwarranted and raises prices to shippers and consumers every day. Dozens of organizations and trade groups representing industries affected by monopolistic railroad conduct have endorsed the Railroad Antitrust Enforcement Act, which is identical to this amendment. Supporters of the legislation have included 20 state attorneys general in 2009, the leading trade associations for the electrical, agricultural, chemical, and paper industries, the National Industrial Transportation League, and the nation's leading consumer groups. In sum, by clearing out this thicket of outmoded antitrust exemptions, this amendment will cause railroads to be subject to the same laws as the rest of our economy. Government antitrust enforcers will finally have the tools to prevent anti-competitive transactions and practices by railroads. Likewise, private parties will be able to utilize the antitrust laws to deter anti-competitive conduct and to seek redress for their injuries. On the Antitrust Subcommittee, we have seen that in industry after industry, vigorous application of our nation's antitrust laws is the best way to eliminate barriers to competition, to end monopolistic behavior, to keep prices low and quality of service high. The railroad industry is no different. All those who rely on railroads to ship their products, whether it is an electric utility for its coal, a farmer to ship grain, or a factory to acquire its raw materials or ship out its finished product, deserve the full application of the antitrust laws to end the anti-competitive abuses all too prevalent in this industry today. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. I ask unanimous consent that my statement be printed at an appropriate place in the record next to the text of the amendment.
Without objection,
Thank you very
will be
much,
included.
Madam President.
Thank you.
Madam President.
The senator from Tennessee is recognized.
Madam President, I ask consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thanks, Madam President. My late friend, the late Alex Haley, the author of Roots, lived his life by these 6 words: find the good and praise it. I'm here today to praise a remarkable hero who served in one of the most difficult battles in our nation's history and who today at 90 years of age lives a quiet life in Memphis with his family. Wilbur K. Hoffman, or Bill, to his fellow Rangers, was a member of the Dog Company of the 2nd Ranger Battalion, which in 1944 was among the select few companies that stormed the cliffs of Pointe du Hoc on D-Day and turned the war around for the Allies. 40 years ago, Bill Hoffman and his fellow 2nd Battalion Rangers clambered up the rocky cliffs on the shoreline of France. President Reagan returned to the windswept spot to pay tribute. President Reagan called them the boys of Pointe du Hoc. The president said, quote, "These are the men who took the cliffs. These are the champions who helped free a continent. These are the heroes who helped end a war." And this is Bill Hoffman, a hero who helped free a continent and end a war. Bill volunteered to join the Army in 1942. A year later, he volunteered to join the Rangers, a select group charged with special missions. Bill says that because of all their special training, they'd simply, quote, get the mission done, unquote. Bill served in the Army for 24 years. He got out in 1945 after the war, took a look at the job market and said, I think I'll go back in. Bill likes to say, everything that happened, I volunteered for. And if you happen to ask him how he feels about it when he looks back, he'll tell you just as plainly, no regrets. This year, the Army has awarded Bill a Purple Heart, but not for the first time. During World War II, the Army tried, but Bill, in an Army ward surrounded by soldiers who had lost arms and legs in fighting, believed that his wounds just didn't measure up. And so he said, I don't think so. Bill's son, David, more than 60 years after his father first declined the Purple Heart, contacted the Army about trying again. Capturing his father's humility in declining the medal decades ago, David calls his dad the nicest guy you'll ever meet, friendly and outgoing, but by the same token, he doesn't like to talk about himself, says the son. Bill is the father of 7 children, and nearly all of them that could join the service did, or married someone who did. Bill is not a native Tennessean. He was born in Newark, New Jersey. He came to Tennessee first as a ranger in training. The Rangers came from all over the country and assembled at Camp Forest in Tullahoma for training. Bill's wife came down to visit him there for a couple of days during training, and it must have had a real effect on her, because more than 30 years later, After Bill was out of the Army after 24 years of service, and they were living in New York State, Bill's wife said to him, "I want to go to Tennessee. I like it down there." So they packed up the U-Haul and moved to Ashland City along the Cumberland River. Today, Bill is one of only 3 Rangers left from the original 2nd Battalion Dog Company. While the Ranger reunions used to occur once every 2 years, the guys are getting old, Bill says, and now they're doing them every year. Good bunch of guys, Bill calls his fellow heroes. They say Ranger friendships are forever. It's true. Bill turns 91 on Friday. It's an honor for me to wish this American hero a happy birthday. So congratulations, Bill Hoffman. Your nation is proud of you. Find the good and praise it. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Thank you. The senator from Rhode Island is recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today to speak in support of the Transportation Reauthorization Bill, which is currently before the Senate. It's called the Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century Act, so we call it by its acronym MAP 21. And it is a critical piece of legislation that will put Americans back to work and lay the foundation for future economic growth. Madam President, our transportation infrastructure has long been at the heart of America's success, from the transcontinental railroad to the interstate highway. Yet, across the country, the infrastructure that helped build our great economy has been allowed to fall into disrepair. For evidence of our nation's crumbling infrastructure, one need look no further than my home state of Rhode Island. Anyone who drives to work or school in our state sees the problems. Bridges that are subject to weight restrictions, highways with lane closures, and roads everywhere marked with potholes. Only 1/3 of our highway miles are rated in fair or good condition. The majority are poor or mediocre. According to a recent report, 1 in 5 bridges in Rhode Island is structurally deficient, the 4th highest figure for any state. You look nationwide, the picture does not improve. The American Society of Civil Engineers rates our national transportation systems as near failing. They give our roads and highways a D-, our bridges a C, our freight and passenger rail a C-, and our transit systems a D. This is not the kind of report card you want to post at home on your refrigerator, and it's not one that our great nation should tolerate. Instead of committing ourselves to solving our infrastructure deficit, however, we continue to fall short. The civil engineers estimate that we would need to dedicate $250 billion each year to bring our transportation systems into a state of good repair. At current levels, the United States spends only 2.4% of GDP on infrastructure, compared with European nations at 5% and China and India at about 9%. Let's recall why it's so important that we invest in transportation. Our economy relies on the ability to get goods and services to where they're needed. An entrepreneur cannot start a business if his employees can't get to work. A manufacturer cannot stay in business if its products cannot reach its customers. And a free market can only operate if supply can actually get to demand. Our roads, our trains, our buses, those are what allow this to happen. If we don't make the necessary investment, our global competitors nevertheless will. MAP 21 represents really a down payment that will fund important highway, transit, and rail projects to repair our aging transportation infrastructure and help ensure that America can succeed as it has since we first broke ground on the interstate highway system. As important as this bill is to our long-term prosperity and to our global economic position, MAP 21 also provides immediate support to local construction projects and the quality jobs that go along with them. It's estimated that MAP 21 will protect 1.8 million existing jobs around the country, with the potential to create up to 1 million more new jobs. This is obviously particularly important given the high level of unemployment in the construction industry. In my home state of Rhode Island, this bill would support an estimated 8,100 jobs. At a time when our state unemployment rate hovers stubbornly around 10%, those jobs are absolutely critical. Given the decrepit state of our transportation systems, it should be obvious that we'll have to address our infrastructure needs at some point. We need to do this work sooner or later. And there's no better time to make that investment than now, while so many workers are ready to get to work and so many projects are ready to get underway. I know in Rhode Island there's no shortage of workers or of worthwhile transportation projects. In fact, Secretary of Transportation LaHood was in Providence today, and I invited him to tour one of the most significant of Rhode Island's transportation projects, and that is the Providence Viaduct. The viaduct is an overland highway bridge that carries Interstate 95 for nearly a quarter of a mile through our capital city, through downtown Providence. It is one of the busiest stretches of the entire I-95 corridor. As you can see in this aerial picture, the viaduct runs north and south over U.S. Route 6 and State Route 10, over the Amtrak Northeast Corridor, commuter and freight lines, and over the Woonasquatucket River. It provides access to downtown Providence, to 4 universities, to Rhode Island Hospital, to our convention center and arena, and to the Providence Place Mall, not to mention the north-south traffic along the eastern seaboard that traffics through this area. What Secretary LaHood saw on his tour today is a bridge that is quite literally crumbling. The viaduct was built in 1964, and it's showing its age. Its deck is badly deteriorated, steel girders are cracked and don't meet the minimum specifications for brittleness, and our State Department of Transportation has installed these wooden planks under the I-beams to keep concrete from falling through onto the cars and pedestrians and even trains that travel underneath the highway. You can also see here where a section of the concrete has fallen from the support pier, exposing the steel reinforcement, which is now rusting out in the open. While the viaduct remains safe for travel today, it is a weak link in the critical I-95 corridor. It's a potential safety hazard for the 160,000 vehicles that travel on it each and every day, as well as to the cars and trains that pass underneath that need to be protected with these planks from the roadway falling in on them. The bridge is inspected on a regular basis, just as a precaution. If the viaduct were to fail or simply require posted weight limits, it would cause substantial regional disruptions to traffic and to commerce and trade. Clearly, this is a problem that needs to be addressed. The cost of repairing the Providence Viaduct is estimated at roughly $140 million. This is a reasonable investment to help ensure the flow of commerce through the entire Northeast, but it represents a very significant financial burden for a small state like Rhode Island. Fixing the viaduct would take out almost 2/3 of the money that Rhode Island would get from this bill. Rhode Island simply isn't big enough and hasn't got the resources to tackle this important federal project and still meet our other transportation obligations. So I have filed an amendment to MAP 21 to fund the program for projects of national and regional significance. The Projects of National and Regional Significance program is a competitive grant program that is designed to support critical, high-cost transportation projects that are difficult to complete with existing funding sources. This program can help us address those big infrastructure projects around the country, ones like the viaduct, that are currently being kicked down the road because the state DOTs just can't scrape enough money together to get them underway. The Projects of National and Regional Significance program is authorized in MAP 21. We got that done in the Environment and Public Works Committee. Now, we need to get that authorized program funded. I'm pleased to have the support of my senior senator, Jack Reed, and Senator Merkley on this amendment, and I look forward to working with them and other senators so we can start the important work of rebuilding critical infrastructure projects like the viaduct that are so important to our economy. While I'm thanking other senators, let me recognize Senator Olympia Snowe for her work on another amendment that would grant states limited flexibility to use congestion mitigation and air quality funds towards their transit systems. This is an important issue for Rhode Island as we begin to scale up our new South County commuter rail. I introduced a version of this amendment in committee and continue to believe that increased flexibility in the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program, what's called CMAQ, will promote state-level transit options that we so critically need. Let me also thank our chairwoman, Senator Boxer, and her ranking member, Senator Inhofe, for their consideration of our amendment and, more importantly, for their hard work on this bill overall. As a member of the Environment and Public Works Committee, I can testify that the leadership of Chairman Boxer and Ranking Member Inhofe working together is what has made the difference for this transportation reauthorization. Through their efforts, we were able to unanimously vote the bill out of committee, making an important statement that investment in our nation's infrastructure has strong bipartisan support. Senators Boxer and Inhofe have set an example that I hope will ultimately be followed by the handful of senators who are obstructing progress on this transportation bill and our colleagues on the other side of this building. The American people deserve better than efforts to gut transportation jobs and slash infrastructure programs or to slow down progress on this bill with irrelevant amendments. With our economy struggling to get back on its feet, with our roads and bridges in desperate need of repair, now is no time, and this is not the bill, to be debating unpopular and misguided efforts to roll back protections for women's health. Now is not the time, and this is not the bill, to be debating whether we should undermine rules that protect our environment or fast-track a pipeline project that is clearly not ready for prime time. We have a bipartisan bill before us. We have a bill that will create jobs. We have a bill that will get our economy moving forward. That should be our priority. We should get to the business of legislating on this bill. Madam President, this is a country that does big things. We built highway and rail systems connecting Americans from coast to coast. We built skyscrapers and airplanes. We built rockets to bring us to the moon and back. Big things are part of America's national identity. And just as importantly, they're a vital source of jobs during this trying economic time. So let's keep doing big things. Let's give people in Rhode Island and across our country a transportation infrastructure that they can be proud of. And let's not cut funding and retreat. We cannot afford to go backwards. The infrastructure is what supports our economy. We need to refocus on the job of getting America moving ahead and MAP 21 is a step forward. I thank the chair, and I yield the floor.
The senator from California is recognized.
Madam President, I'd like to thank Senator Whitehouse of Rhode Island for his words, and also he is just an exceptional member of the Environment and Public Works Committee. First and foremost, he brings us, the point of view of his state, and he fights for his state every inch of the way, every day. But he also brings national leadership to the fore on the issue of infrastructure and the need to keep up with our incredible failing infrastructure. The fact that we have to fix these bridges, 70,000 of which are deficient, 50% of the roads that are not up to par. In Rhode Island, we have some real serious problems, and the senator has brought those to the fore. He's a leader also on a clean and healthy environment, protecting the air for his people, the water. And he couldn't be more eloquent. I mean, he's making a point that, look, we could come up with some very difficult amendments on our side of the aisle and slow things up and gum up the works, et cetera. But doesn't my friend think that with so many construction workers out of work, they've got well over 15% unemployment in the construction industry, more than twice, about twice as the national rate, which is too high as it is. And we have a chance to protect 1.8 million jobs and create another million jobs. Isn't it time to say that, birth control was an issue that was resolved decades ago, and let's move on to the task at hand and put people back to work?
It does not make sense, Madam Chair, and I thank you so much for your leadership getting us to this point. I know how much frustration you must feel having worked so hard and having worked in such a bipartisan this point to now have the process that would get this bill moving forward, that would get the funding out there, that would get the infrastructure repaired, that would put men and women to work in good, solid, high-paying jobs, all snarled up so that a small group of people can score points in a political issue that has nothing to do with transportation or infrastructure or highways. I mean, if people really want to have a fight about whether women should get access to contraceptive medicine in this country, I suppose that's their right in the Senate. But the idea that you have to stop a highway bill to force that fight is what, to me, is irresponsible. And so I know how frustrating
if my colleague would stay on the floor for just another minute. I know my colleague worked very hard on the health care bill. Am I right on that? Do you serve on the Health Committee as well? And I remember you're being so proud of the prevention piece that you brought to us. The prevention piece, which you made the case to us publicly and privately and in caucus, would save so much money for the American people. I mean, right now we know, for example, I just read this, I wonder if my friends saw it, that if you have a colorectal screening, you are 50% less likely to die of colorectal cancer. This is a screening test. Now, we certainly know about mammography. We know about all of this. Is my colleague aware that what the Blunt Amendment says, insurance company, religious or not, can withhold any one of those preventive services from being offered to employees if they had some kind of vague moral objection? So is my colleague aware that all the work he put in on making sure that insurers covered for our people preventive services such as mammography and colorectal screening and HIV screening and all of these important benefits, plus a list of essential benefits just as important, that all of that could come to nothing if the Blunt Amendment passed and an employer woke up and said, I know a good way to save money, I'll just say I have a moral objection and not offer any of these. Is my friend aware of how deep this Blunt Amendment reaches into health care reform?
I thank my chairman, and yes, it is kind of astonishing, the breadth and the scope of this amendment. As if CEOs don't have enough power over their workforce, as if they haven't done enough to offshore jobs out of American factories and over to factories overseas. Now they would be able to dictate what kind of health care their employees can receive, not based on marketplace considerations, not based even on health considerations, but based on their own unchecked moral or religious beliefs. And I think it's a terrible mistake to go down that road, but I think it's a double mistake. I think it's wrong to go down that road in the first instance, but it's also wrong while we need jobs so urgently, while our highways crumble and our bridges deteriorate and waterworks continue to fail, and we have the ability to put people to work in America at good jobs. You can't offshore a job building an American highway. You've got to do that right here in this country. These are important jobs. This is important work. We should be getting about this, and I think it sends a terrible signal to the American people when the United States Senate, taking up this piece of legislation, has to be led off into all these other battles that have nothing to do with highways, nothing to do with infrastructure, nothing to do with jobs, or simply an exercise in political gamesmanship. And it's unfortunate when there's real stakes for real families on the table and real time slipping by as we don't get this done. We get jammed up enough around here. As hard as you've worked to bring this, as hard as the chairman has worked to bring this to the floor and to be ready, and now here we are, snarled again, stopped again, obstructed again, dealing with irrelevant issues again, all for the entertainment and distraction, I guess, of people. But it's not about jobs. It's not about the economy. It's not about our infrastructure. It's not about laying the foundation for future prosperity. And it's frustrating that we have to go through this exercise.
Well, I want to thank my friend. When I looked at him, I thought you are one of the few people who has such a stake, a personal stake, in two things that are coming, you know, have been merged together, unfortunately. The Blunt Amendment, which would allow anyone to opt out of providing so many of the services my friend worked to make sure the American people had, plus 3 weeks were now delayed on a bill my friend helped me with so strongly and so powerfully. So I wanted to make sure people understood that in your state, that you've worked so hard to make sure people have access to health care. The Blunt Amendment would drive a big, you know, Mack truck through this, not to use a kind of funny analogy with the highway bill, but that's what it would do. In the meantime, stopping us from getting on to our work creating all these jobs. Well, my feeling is we will defeat the Blunt Amendment tomorrow. I'm very hopeful. And with that in mind, Madam President, I'd like to introduce a number of letters into the record, if I might, without objection.
Without objection, so ordered. They'll be introduced in the record.
Thank you. The first one is a letter from the Cancer Action Network asking us to vote no on the Blunt Amendment. On behalf of millions of cancer patients, survivors, and their families, we write to express our opposition to the amendment proposed by Senator Roy Blunt. And they talk about the fact it would permit employers to refuse employees' insurance coverage for any health care benefit guaranteed by health reform. And they're very, very strong on this. And they talk about the implications of this provision could result in coverage denials of life-saving preventive services such as mammograms or tobacco cessation based on employer discretion. And that's a new letter. Then we got a letter from the Trust for America's Health. They say the Blunt Amendment would allow any health insurance plan or employer, religious or not, to exclude any preventive service if they decided not to offer it. The SEIU, Service Employees International, they call the Blunt Amendment an extreme proposal that turns back the clock, Madam President. The Human Rights Campaign letter, the Blunt Amendment would place the moral objections of any employer over the health of millions of Americans. 80 organizations signed a letter that says the Blunt Amendment means employers and insurance companies can not only deny access to birth control, but any health care service. And that's signed by Advocates for Youth, America Votes, the AIDS Institute, American Association of University Women, American College of Nurses and Midwives, American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, American Medical Students, Black Women's Health Imperative, Catholics for Choice, Reproductive Rights Center, Center for Women Policy Studies, Coalition of Labor Union Women, Choice USA, Concerned Clergy for Choice, Doctors for America, Equal Health Network. I mean, this goes on and on. The Latina Institute for Reproductive Health, Planned Parenthood, Population Connection, Progressive Majority, Society of Adolescent Health and Medicine, the National Alliance to Advance Adolescent Health, the National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancy, Trust Women, Silver Ribbon Campaign, Union for Reform Judaism, Unitarian Universalist Association. This is a long list of organizations that oppose the Blunt Amendment. This letter came in from the American Pediatric Association and a number of other youth organizations. They urge us to oppose the Blunt Amendment because it doesn't protect children's access to preventive services. Another letter signed by many, many more organizations, including Spina Bifida Association, Voices for America's Children, Children's Health Care is a Legal Duty, Easter Seals, Family Voices, First Focus. It goes on and on. American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, American Association of Maternal and Child Health Programs, Association of University Center on Disabilities, Child Incorporated. All of these organizations have come together and they say, we are committed to the well-being of infants, children, adolescents, and pregnant women, and we urge you to oppose the amendment offered by Roy Blunt. So all you're going to hear from the other side is misstatements about how the Blunt Amendment is nothing more than what we've always done. Okay, then why are you doing it? It's because it reaches so far. We all support a religious exemption for religious providers. We all support that. We do not support the ability of any insurance company, non-religious, any employer, non-religious, to stand up and say, you know what, I don't believe that vaccines work. Therefore, I don't think they ought to be made available to my people. And they say, well, why? And they say, I have a moral conviction. You know, I have a moral conviction that people should have known better before they took that first cigarette when they were 11 or 12. Therefore, I'm not going to give any treatment. Too bad. They'll just get lung cancer. I mean, seriously, that's what the Blunt Amendment will do. It will allow anyone, non-religious, to say they have an objection and not offer a host of preventive and essential health care services, including contraception. So tomorrow is our time. We're going to defeat the Blunt Amendment, and when we defeat the Blunt Amendment, we're going to move on to the highway bill, hooray, and maybe, just maybe, people will listen to Senator Olympia Snowe, who said that we should not get tied up in knots over these controversial things, and we should do what's right for the American people. And I certainly support that. You know, there's just one more thing I want to put in the record, and that's the testimony of a woman who tried very hard to speak to this panel of men. This panel of men who were called by the Republican chairman, Issa, to testify about women's health. Not one woman there, but they were the experts. They denied this woman the chance to speak. And if she had been able to speak, this is what she wanted to say, that she had a friend who went to the doctor. The friend had a cyst on her ovary, and the doctor said, you have to take birth control. That's going to help. Those pills are going to help reduce the size of that cyst. She couldn't afford the birth control pills, and her employer wouldn't cover them. So she couldn't take them. She's a student. She wrote that this cyst was so painful, I woke up thinking I'd been shot. She wrote, without taking This is what her friend told her. Without her taking the birth control, a massive cyst the size of a tennis ball had grown on her ovary. She had to have surgery to remove her entire ovary. And her friend says she's not here this morning. She's in a doctor's office right now. Since last year's surgery, she's been experiencing night sweats, weight gain, and other symptoms of early menopause as a result of the removal of her ovary. She's 32 years old. And she quotes her friend saying, "If my body is indeed in early menopause, no fertility specialist in the world will be able to help me have my own children. I will have no chance at giving my mother her desperately desired grandbabies, simply because the insurance policy that I paid for, totally unsubsidized by my school, would not cover my prescription for birth control when I needed it." And so her friend says now, in addition to facing the health complications that have come with having menopause at an early age, increased risk of cancer, heart disease, osteoporosis, she may never be able to be a mom. So, Mr. President, when we're talking about the Blunt Amendment, we're not talking about some obtuse issue. We're not talking about some philosophical issue. Mr. President, what we are talking about when we're talking about the Blunt Amendment is a young woman, a student at law school, who couldn't afford to pay for the birth control pills, which would have saved her fertility, which would have saved her horrific pain, a painful operation where she lost her ovary simply because she couldn't have access to her birth control pills. Now, this is not about, some argument that doesn't have real consequences for our people. Your constituents and my constituents deserve to have access to preventive care. They deserve to have access to essential health care, and the Blunt Amendment will take that away from them. They'll take that away from them, and all on a highway bill. All on a highway bill. So let's keep the Blunt Amendment away from this highway bill. This highway bill is a product of strong bipartisanship, as the President has told the Senate. Let's keep it clean. Let's keep off it these extraneous amendments that will roll back environmental laws that are cleaning up the air. We'll keep the arsenic, the mercury out of the air, the lead out of the air. Let's not roll back, these laws on a highway bill. Let's get the highway bill done. And we have other arguments about other issues. Let's put those issues on a relevant bill. This is the time now for us to pull together, not pull apart. The nation needs us to work together. It's an election year, and it's a difficult time. There's a lot of name-calling going on back and forth in politics out there on the campaign trail. We're still here, as last I checked, and we're supposed to be doing our work for the American people. We have a chance to do it on this highway bill. Let's defeat the Blunt Amendment in the morning. And I thank my friends for coming over to the floor so eloquently today and speaking against this dangerous, precedent-setting Blunt Amendment, which will turn back the clock on women's health and on our families' health. I thank you very much. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, are we in morning business? Are we in a quorum call? I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to join my colleagues in opposition to the amendment offered by Senator Blunt. It is discouraging that when we should be having a debate on our nation's infrastructure and surface transportation needs, we are instead talking about women's health and contraception. As the senator from California noted earlier, my state is a state that understands the importance of upgrading our infrastructure and investing in surface transportation. I live just a few blocks from the bridge that collapsed in the middle of that river on that sunny day in Minnesota, 8-lane highway in the middle of the Mississippi River. So we understand the importance of investment in infrastructure, and that's what we should be focusing on in this bill. Instead, we have taken a different turn. Now, I understand that there are many different perspectives and opinions when it comes to issues related to contraception and women's health. However, we shouldn't be talking about them when we're supposed to be talking about infrastructure, highway, roads, and bridges. People are free to give speeches. They're free to talk about whatever they want, but this amendment doesn't belong on this bill. Nevertheless, it is here, and I think it's very important that we address it and the American people understand what it would mean. Unfortunately, this amendment impacts more than just contraception. This amendment ultimately limits our ability to address our health care challenges through prevention and wellness. Chronic conditions such as diabetes, heart disease, and cancer can be avoided through prevention, early detection, and treatment. We all know that, right? That's pretty common knowledge in our country. During health care reform, we made great strides in improving the health and well-being of our nation by strengthening preventative services. We addressed prohibitive costs by eliminating co-pays and cost-sharing for essential services like mammograms and colonoscopies. We addressed access issues by ensuring coverage for preventative autism or cholesterol screenings, to name a few. I also fought to include the EARLY Act, which promoted early detection for breast cancer for young women. These types of preventative and early detection services are vital to so many people in this country. As a co-chair of the Congressional Wellness Caucus, a bipartisan caucus, I have also heard from numerous employers who understand that a healthy workforce only increases productivity and output. It would be unfortunate if we eliminated access to prevention and wellness services that keep our nation's workforce strong and productive. Because of the necessity of these services and the benefits that they provide to men, women, and children, including contraception, I ask my colleagues to oppose the Blunt Amendment. The Blunt Amendment would allow any employer or insurance company to refuse to cover any of the prevention services, any essential health benefit, or any other health service required under the health care law, allowing these entities to deny critical health care to the millions who rely on these entities for insurance. The consequences of this provision would mean employers and other organizations which for any reason would refuse to offer coverage of life-saving preventative services such as mammograms or tobacco cessation would be based on employer discretion. That's why I don't think it's a surprise that organizations like the American Cancer Society, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Public Health Association, and the March of Dimes oppose this amendment. Now, I think we all know, for those that support American Cancer Society, March of Dimes, American Academy of Pediatrics, these groups tend not to get involved in contraception issues, right? And that goes to show you right now that this amendment is much broader than just talking about contraception. Annually, this is according to the American Cancer Society, annually 7 out of 10 deaths among Americans are attributed to chronic diseases such as cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and stroke. The Affordable Care Act made significant strides to stem this epidemic by ensuring patients would have access to essential care that would address prevention, early detection, and treatment, all necessary elements to improve the health and well-being of our nation. And this is according to the Cancer Society. Unfortunately, the expansive nature of the proposed Blunt Amendment would directly undercut this progress. I'm concerned, Mr. President, that the broad-based nature of this amendment will prevent men, women, and children the preventative services they need as a result of the personal beliefs of a single individual or an employer or an insurance company. I do not believe that this is the way to protect Americans in need of health care services, and I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.